Healing the father wound doesn't just improve an empath, it fundamentally restructures the psyche into something society finds unrecognizable and frankly dangerous. Jung documented this transformation across dozens of cases and called it one of the most terrifying shifts in human development. The gentle empath with no boundaries becomes a force with an unbreakable spine of steel. But here's the question that kept Jung awake at night. What happens when the structureless empath finally develops psychological skin? What happens when someone who absorbed everyone else's pain suddenly stops being society's emotional punching bag? Jung discovered something that modern psychology still struggles to accept. The father wound isn't just daddy issues, it's the absence of psychological armor. It's living without skin in a world full of parasites. And when an empath finally heals this wound, they don't just change, they become untouchable. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why Jung called this the most dangerous transformation in human psychology, why families fear it, why narcissists run from it, and why the healed empath becomes something society has no framework to control. Jung's clinical notes from 1921 reveal a disturbing pattern. Patient after patient arrived at his Zurich clinic with identical symptoms: chronic guilt, inability to say no, a paralyzing fear of disappointing others. They apologized for existing. They carried everyone else's emotional garbage while drowning in their own. But Jung noticed something that made his blood run cold. These weren't weak people. These were empaths with extraordinary emotional intelligence who had never developed what he called the father archetype. Law, order, boundary, structure. Without this internal architecture, the empath becomes an open door. Every narcissist, every energy vampire, every emotional predator walks right through, and the empath thanks them for it. Jung wrote that the father archetype represents the psychological container that allows sensitivity to exist without destruction. It's the difference between a lake and a puddle. Both hold water, but only one has defined edges. The empath without the father lives as a puddle, absorbing every footstep, every raindrop, every piece of debris that falls into their path. He documented case after case of empaths who could read a room with supernatural accuracy. They knew who was lying. They sensed who was in pain. They felt the emotional currents that everyone else missed completely. But this extraordinary gift came with a curse. They had no filter, no protection, no way to stop the flood of information and emotion from completely overwhelming their system. One patient, a woman Jung called Patient M in his notes, described it like living with all her nerve endings exposed. Every interaction felt like sandpaper on raw flesh. Every conflict felt like being stabbed. Every criticism felt like death itself. And yet she kept showing up, kept absorbing, kept trying to fix everyone around her while slowly fragmenting into pieces. Jung realized he wasn't treating a disorder. He was observing what happens when profound sensitivity develops without the corresponding structure to contain it. Here's where Jung's research gets deeply uncomfortable. He discovered that the unhealed empath doesn't just attract toxic people by accident. They unconsciously seek them out. They're hunting for the father they never had, the boss who sets impossible standards, the partner who withholds approval, the friend who keeps them walking on eggshells. This is the nice guy syndrome that Jung documented decades before modern psychology gave it a name. The empath doesn't love these people. They're unconsciously begging them for structure, for boundaries, for someone to finally teach them how to contain their own power. And here's the most disturbing part. Narcissists can smell this absence from across a room. They're drawn to the empath like sharks to blood in water, not because empaths are weak, but because empaths are powerful beings who haven't learned to protect their power. They're nuclear reactors without containment, unlimited energy with zero shielding. Jung observed this pattern so consistently that he developed a theory that still makes psychologists uncomfortable. The empath and the narcissist aren't random pairings. They're unconscious complements. The narcissist needs someone to absorb their shame. The empath needs someone to provide structure. Both are looking for what they lack. Both end up destroying each other in the process. Patient M had been married 3 times. 3 different men. 3 identical dynamics. Each husband started charming and confident. Each gradually revealed controlling, manipulative patterns. Each relationship ended with her hospitalized for nervous exhaustion, while he moved seamlessly to his next victim. When Jung asked her why she kept choosing the same type, her answer shook him. She said she didn't feel real unless someone was telling her what to do. She didn't feel like a person unless someone was defining her boundaries from the outside. She had never learned to generate structure from within, so she kept seeking it from exactly the wrong sources. This is the trap Jung called the false father. The empath mistakes control for care, domination for protection, manipulation for guidance, and by the time they realize the difference, they've already sacrificed years of their life to someone who was never capable of giving them what they actually needed. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Jung's patient notes paint a horrifying picture of life without the father archetype. Imagine feeling everyone's emotions as if they were your own. Imagine apologizing when someone else hurts you. Imagine spending your entire existence trying to earn approval from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. The empath without boundaries doesn't just struggle with guilt. They live in a state of chronic psychological invasion. Their nervous system processes everyone else's anxiety. Their emotional body carries everyone else's unprocessed trauma. They become human shock absorbers for every dysfunctional system they enter. And society loves them for it. Families need scapegoats. Workplaces need people who absorb toxicity without complaint. Narcissists need endless supply. The boundaryless empath serves all these functions perfectly, while slowly dying inside. Jung observed something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable today. These empaths weren't victims of random bad luck. They were systematically targeted because their lack of psychological skin made them perfect containers for everyone else's shadow. He documented how families unconsciously organized themselves around the empath's capacity to absorb dysfunction. The alcoholic father could drink because the empath daughter absorbed his shame. The narcissistic mother could rage because the empath son absorbed her emotional volatility. The golden child could remain perfect because the empath sibling carried all the family's darkness. Patient M described family dinners as psychological warfare. She could feel her mother's resentment before they even sat down, could sense her father's disappointment in the way he avoided eye contact, could absorb her brother's contempt in his body language, and she responded the only way she knew how, by trying to fix it, by becoming smaller, by absorbing more until she felt like she might actually disappear. Jung realized these empaths were living in a state of constant hypervigilance that would break most people within weeks, but they'd been doing it for decades. Their entire nervous system had adapted to functioning as early warning systems for everyone else's emotional weather, while completely ignoring their own inner climate. The chronic exhaustion, the mystery illnesses, the autoimmune conditions. Jung started seeing these not as separate problems, but as the body's desperate attempt to create boundaries when the psyche couldn't. If she couldn't say no psychologically, her body would say no physically by shutting down completely. Jung documented a moment that appeared in every father wound healing case, a moment so painful it restructured the entire personality. The moment when the empath realizes with crushing clarity that no one is coming to save them. Not their parents, not their partners, not God, not Jung himself. This is what Jung called withdrawing the projection. The empath has been unconsciously projecting the father archetype onto external figures, waiting for someone to finally provide the structure, protection, and boundaries they desperately need. And in one devastating moment of clarity, they realize the external father is never coming back. For patient M, this moment came in Jung's office during her 4th year of analysis. She had been describing her latest relationship crisis, waiting for Jung to tell her what to do, waiting for him to provide the answer, the structure, the permission to leave or stay, and Jung, in a moment of calculated cruelty that he later described as the most important intervention of his career, said nothing. He sat in silence and watched her wait, watched her beg with her eyes, watched her fragment when the rescue didn't come. She screamed at him, called him cruel, said he was just like all the others. And then, in the silence after her rage, something shifted. Jung described seeing her face change, seeing something harden in her eyes, seeing the moment when the external search ended and the internal building began. She looked at him and said 6 words that Jung wrote in capital letters in his notes. "No one is coming for me." For most people, this realization leads to despair. But for the empath, it triggers something Jung called the most dangerous transformation in human psychology. Because once they stop waiting for external rescue, they have no choice but to become their own authority. And an empath with authority is something the world has never learned to handle. This is where the snap happens, not a breakdown, a breakthrough. The empath stops asking permission and starts creating their own laws. They stop seeking approval and start generating their own validation. They stop waiting for rescue and become their own authority. Jung called this building the internal father. It's the moment when external structure becomes internal architecture, when borrowed boundaries become unshakable core principles, when the empath finally develops psychological skin, and society absolutely hates it. Patient M's transformation didn't happen overnight. Jung documented the process meticulously. First came rage, months of it. Rage at her parents for never teaching her to protect herself. Rage at her ex-husbands for exploiting her openness. Rage at society for rewarding her self-sacrifice while punishing her needs. Rage at Jung himself for not saving her. But underneath the rage, something was building. She started saying no to family demands. Small no's at first. No, I can't host Thanksgiving. No, I can't lend you money. No, I can't listen to your problems today. Each no felt like jumping off a cliff. Each no triggered waves of guilt so intense she thought she might die. But she didn't die. She got stronger. Jung observed her developing what he called psychological musculature, the ability to hold her own position under pressure, the capacity to feel someone's disappointment without absorbing it, the strength to witness someone's pain without taking responsibility for fixing it. She was building the internal father, the part of her that could say this is the law and mean it, the part that could create structure from within instead of seeking it from without, the part that could protect her sensitivity instead of apologizing for it. And Jung noted something that fascinated him. As she built these internal boundaries, her empathic abilities didn't decrease. They sharpened. She could still feel everything, could still read every room, could still sense emotional undercurrents with supernatural accuracy. But now she had the structure to process what she felt without being destroyed by it. Here's what makes the healed empath unrecognizable. They stop smiling when they're angry. They stop apologizing for existing. They stop explaining their boundaries. They become what Jung called consciously selfish, in a way that terrifies people who benefited from their previous boundarylessness. The transformation isn't subtle. The empath who used to absorb everyone's emotional garbage now reflects it back with surgical precision. The person who used to say yes to everything now says no without guilt. The individual who used to twist themselves into knots for approval now walks away from situations that don't serve them. And here's the part that makes manipulators' blood run cold. The healed empath can still feel everything. They still have extraordinary emotional intelligence. They still see through every manipulation, every lie, every hidden agenda. But now they have something they never had before: the internal structure to act on what they see. Patient M's family called Jung in a panic. Something was wrong with her. She'd become cold, distant, selfish. She'd stopped attending family events where her mother's narcissism held court. She'd stopped accepting phone calls from her brother, who only reached out when he needed money. She'd stopped playing her assigned role in the family system. And when they confronted her, demanding to know what had changed, her response shocked them into silence. She looked her mother in the eye and said, "I can feel your rage right now. I can sense your desperation to control me. I can see exactly what you're doing. And none of it works anymore." Jung noted that this was the moment families typically escalate. They amp up the guilt. They weaponize love. They threaten abandonment. But the healed empath has finally learned the most dangerous truth. Some abandonments are gifts. Some rejections are freedom. Some losses are actually victories in disguise. Jung observed that when an empath finally integrates the father archetype, they don't just develop boundaries. They develop authority, king energy, the ability to rule their own inner kingdom with absolute sovereignty. They stop being leaves in the wind and become mountains that the wind flows around. This makes them dangerous to manipulators for one simple reason: guilt trips no longer work. Emotional manipulation bounces off like rain off stone. Love bombing, gaslighting, projection, triangulation. All the tactics that used to work perfectly now fail completely. The healed empath has become immune to psychological warfare, not because they stopped feeling, but because they finally learned to separate what's theirs from what belongs to others. They feel your emotions without absorbing them. They see your pain without taking responsibility for it. They witness your dysfunction without trying to fix it. Patient M described the shift like suddenly being able to see through walls. She could sit across from her narcissistic mother and feel the manipulation coming before words even formed, could sense the guilt trip being constructed in real time, could watch the emotional trap being set with perfect clarity. But instead of stepping into the trap like she'd done for 30 years, she simply observed it, acknowledged it, and chose not to engage. Her mother would launch into a tirade about abandonment and ingratitude, and patient M would sit there, feeling everything, processing nothing that wasn't hers, and simply say, "I hear that you're upset. I'm not responsible for managing your emotions." Jung called this the birth of the inner king, the aspect of the psyche that can witness chaos without becoming chaotic, that can stand in the storm without being moved, that can feel the full force of someone else's dysfunction without taking it on as their own. This wasn't coldness. This was sovereignty. And people who had spent years exploiting her openness couldn't stand being faced with someone who could see them completely while refusing to be destroyed by what she saw. Let's be crystal clear about what actually changed. The healed empath didn't become mean. They became solid. They didn't lose their sensitivity. They finally learned to protect it. They didn't stop caring. They stopped caring more about others' comfort than their own survival. Jung wrote that a healed empath is a warrior who feels everything but is moved by nothing against their will. They choose when to open. They choose when to close. They choose who gets access to their extraordinary gifts, and they no longer feel guilty about that choice. This is the transformation that society fears because it can't be undone. You can't guilt someone back into boundarylessness once they've tasted sovereignty. You can't manipulate someone back into people-pleasing once they've learned self-respect. You can't break someone who has finally learned to protect their own foundation. Patient M never went back to her old patterns. She built a life that honored her sensitivity while protecting it fiercely. She developed friendships with other individuated people who valued authenticity over performance. She found work that used her empathic abilities without exploiting them. She created a daily practice of checking what emotions were hers and what she'd absorbed from others. And when Jung asked her what she would tell other empaths suffering from the father wound, her answer became the foundation of his later work on this subject. She said, "Tell them that healing doesn't make you less. It makes you more yourself, more powerful, more able to use your gifts in ways that serve you instead of drain you. Tell them that the people who call you selfish for having boundaries are the same people who benefited from you having none. Tell them that becoming unrecognizable to manipulators is the highest compliment they'll ever receive." Jung documented that the healed empath doesn't just survive. They thrive in ways that seem almost supernatural to people still trapped in boundarylessness. They build careers that honor their sensitivity. They create relationships based on mutual respect instead of exploitation. They move through the world with a quiet confidence that comes from finally learning to trust their own internal authority over anyone else's external demands. The father wound isn't just a psychological problem. It's the difference between a powerful being who gives their power away and a powerful being who has learned to wield it consciously. Jung spent decades documenting this transformation because he understood something that modern psychology is still catching up to. Healing the father wound doesn't make empaths less empathetic. It makes them selectively empathetic, strategically compassionate, consciously generous with their gifts. And that consciousness, that selectivity, that strategy is precisely what makes them dangerous to systems built on their exploitation. The empath who has integrated the father archetype becomes something Jung called the individuated personality. Someone who has learned to honor both their depth of feeling and their need for structure. Someone who can be both infinitely soft and absolutely unmovable. Someone who has finally learned that true strength isn't about building walls. It's about knowing when to open the gate and when to keep it closed. If you felt this shift happening in your own life, if you've noticed yourself becoming unrecognizable to people who used to manipulate you easily, drop a comment below. Share which stage of this transformation you're currently in. Are you still waiting for external rescue? Are you in the rage phase of withdrawing projections? Or have you already built your internal father and are now living as a sovereign being? Let's build a community of empaths who have finally learned that having boundaries doesn't make you less kind. It makes you sustainably kind. Subscribe to join the next dimension of psychological awareness, where we explore Jung's most advanced concepts for empaths who are ready to stop surviving and start thriving. Because the world doesn't need more broken empaths carrying everyone else's shadow. It needs healed empaths who have learned to protect their light while sharing it on their own terms. And Jung's research proves that transformation isn't just possible. It's inevitable once you finally stop waiting for external permission to build your own internal authority. The father wound can be healed. The internal father can be built. And when an empath finally makes that shift, they become exactly what Jung believed they were always meant to be. Not a victim, not a martyr, not society's emotional dumping ground, but a conscious, powerful, sovereign being who feels everything and is destroyed by nothing. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now, Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get the Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.